le ndawo ibuhlungu.
Please stand and observe a moment of silence for Maria, please. Please. I'd like to offer a personal reflection on the role of art, or the role that art has played in my own personal self-sense making. Sorry. Engaging with art in any form is a sensory experience, a deeply personal exchange between the creator and the viewer. Whatever happens when we experience art is in the silent churning of our own heads. We process and make sense of it according to our own lives, circumstances, suffering, experiences, joys, losses, and memories. Art, when we experience it, touches us in ways that even the creator of the work did not intend and can never fathom. Edward Hopper says, if I could say it in words, there would be no reason to paint. Art is the only language that can imagine what can be and put in a picture. Infuse a feeling into a song or on canvas by using color, shading, strokes, splashes, dance. Art is the only language that can articulate and bring to life the dreams of life even after a disaster, a natural catastrophe, and even a conflict. Art is the ultimate generosity, the giving of oneself to another. And because of this, artists should take seriously the call to honesty in their art, as it is a record of our lived experiences, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and sensory. Abudai Diasaba, an African artist born in Cote d'Ivoire in 1983, says this about his work. My work is similar to that of a journalist writing an article. I was simply describing a situation in order to create a record of my country's recent history. But even before the crisis, I worked on similar themes: childhood in the streets, poorness, child soldiers. I'm an ambassador for the children. They do writings on the walls, their wishes, their fears. I'm doing the same on my canvas. I'm like a megaphone for these children. We are products of our surroundings, whether we like it or not. And art, whether we engage with it willingly, deliberately, or through buildings we drive by, walls we walk by, songs we hear sleeping softly in more elevators or loudly on road trips with our friends and family or significant others, on t-shirts or fashion in general. Art forms part of our backdrops always. The choice of art in our homes, for example, raises new generations. It sparks conversations in the home. Some of my first memories of who the world told me I should be versus what my parents, my family, the music my dad played, the art in my home said about I was and could be were made in my home. George Lamba, Charles Otto, Paul Stockworth, Helen Sapiti, and William Cambridge, for example, are some of the artists in the world I engaged with at museums and school trips. Images of such artwork was incorporated in the curriculum, in history, in arts and culture, in drama classes, etc. It was in these spaces that the notion of art is recording and documentation is introduced to me. Art as information open to personal interpretation and sense-making. When words fail or are regulated or censored, art can say what we can't write and publish or say in public platform. It is against this background and this responsibility that artists in their creation must be urged to be as honest as possible in their work, to produce reflective art that is complicated, art that has nuance, texture, has a context, has a story and lesson and experience, voice. That through their art, they record their perceptions, their concerns, their fears, questions, and answers. To document the complicated and the simple dilemmas we face on the daily, and to especially now do that. And I believe that Makandula's work, which I will did just that for us at the end of April this year, it held up a mirror, and we saw ourselves in it. We felt ourselves in it, our anxieties, and the things we do in secret, our fears. It provoked, and we gave it language that Makandula didn't necessarily give it. A performance piece that challenges the place and space for social commentary. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists that will be helping us ground this conversation today. So first, the man of the hour, and the reason why we're here is Imbizo Makandula. Imbizo is a visual artist and photography lecturer in the Fine Arts Department at Rhodes University, whose practice-based research engages Black intellectual histories and indigenous knowledge systems embedded in Iminombo, Izibongo, Imbali, and Ingoma. His work explores memory, identity, spirituality, and Black cultural archives through photography, performance, and visual storytelling. Makandula has exhibited both locally and internationally, with his work contributing significantly to contemporary conversations on Black aesthetics, heritage, and decolonial artistic practice. Imbizo, can you please take your seat? Then we have, this is in no particular order. Other panelist is Dr. Thandokazi May. Dr. Thandokazi May is an academic in the Department of Anthropology at Rhodes. The scholarship focuses on decoloniality, African indigenous knowledge systems, spirituality, pedagogy, and the lived experiences of Black and indigenous students within higher education spaces. Her work critically interrogates how colonial university structures continue to shape knowledge production, identity, and belonging, particularly within South African academic institutions. Stand with us, please. And then last but not least is Refelection. Refelection is a senior lecturer and interdisciplinary artist in the Fine Art Department here at Rhodes, whose research focuses on, I don't know how to say this word, ephemeral, experiential, participatory, and site-specific art practices. Her work spans digital media, installation art, and performance, with a particular interest in collaborative and immersive artistic encounters. Western's creative and scholarly work interrogates space, embodiment, temporality, and audience engagement within contemporary visual and performance art practices. It's So, before we start, I would like for us to get a sense of what Makandula offered as a foregrounding for his work in Jamaica at the Imbizo. And I'd like to ask Vuyo to please read us the Xhosa version of his foreground. Thank you.
So, inhlambuluko ukugcisa okuphilayo kukaMnumzana Sikhumbuzo Makandula. Uyicacisa athi, inhlambuluko ligama elithetha ukuhlambuluka, ukucoca, nokuguqula. Kulomsebenzi wokugcisa kawonke-wonke, ndithatha ukusetyenziswa kwegama okuhleli kabini njengesigama esisetyenziswa kwinqanaba lenkcubeko yaseBhayibhileni kunye nenkolo yesintu yaseAfrika, elibonisa ukuhlanjululwa okukhokelela kwinguquko. Njengomsebenzi wobugcisa bukawonke-wonke, inhlambuluko icetywe njengongenelelo olwenziwa ngokusebenzisana nabafundi besebe lobugcisa. Olu ngenelelo likawonke-wonke kunye nobugcisa lujolise ekuphakamiseni ngokwembono iingxoxo ezingekabikho, ngokubuza ukuba zithini iziphumo zokuba ngummi ngaphakathi kwesiza sikarhulumente esithi siyiyunivesithi yaseRhodes. Kunanjalo nengxoxo malunga nokuba imbali kabani ebalulekileyo ngaphakathi kwinkangeleko yesixeko saseMakhanda nendlela yokuthethathethana kulungelelaniswa izixhobo zokuphila nenkcubeko ephathekayo nebalulekileyo. Inhlambuluko iza kujongana nesithuba sembonakalo kuncamathiselo lwayo olwahlukeneyo njengeendawo ezingekho namaxabiso kananjalo. Njengeendawo namaxabiso kananjalo ezingahlukaniswanga nembono yepolitiki. Iyunivesithi eRhodes, njengezinye iiyunivesithi ezininzi eMzantsi Afrika ebezicwangcisiwe ngaphambili, ziindawo zokwahlula-hlulwa lobandlululo. Eli liziko elikuqondwa njengendawo esisiza sobuwena kunye nokuchasa okanye ukuxhathisa. Enkosi.
So we're going to play the recording of the performance piece so that we're able to contextualize and people see where it started and where it ended, right? And then also some interventions from fine art students as well.
Already. Let's say that we're videos we play 2 videos. One video is the one that I played at the moment. Any videos, maybe will be the video that was documented by social media. Just to give a bit of a context a bit. I was invited in the area by the Office of Transformation and Equity. So they told me that was about the transformation in Imbizo. One of the questions that I had was that the answer about pay Imbizo was about Kobani, like who's going to be there, and really who's it for Imbizo, about why as an Imbizo. So part of the challenge given was that Imbizo transformation in Imbizo was happening at the moment. And I was also told that it's also by invitation. Maybe that absolutely what you do or the of the Imbizo. So the question was but part of Piaman, and I know that the 2 videos that I really want to put emphasis on is Sibonedon, Sivedon, Kwai because I think that's the main reason why I stopped. So the 2 videos will just contextualize part of what I did for transformation in Imbizo as an intervention, but also as an invitation.
On trial for my country, I would first like to expose Rhodes. Rhodes' grand theft of African. On trial for my country, I would first like to expose Rhodes. Rhodes' grand theft of African. On trial for my country, I would first like to expose Rhodes. Rhodes' grand theft of African land and resources, as well as the mass murders of an estimated 60,000 Africans that he perpetrated. He had the support of the British government, which awarded his British South African company a royal charter in 1889. 4 years after the notorious Conference of Berlin. This conference effectively set the rules for an orderly partition of Africa so that the European powers could amicably divide our continent between them as if they owned it. Now, what is this royal charter that the British South African Company received? It was a formal grant enabling them to seize, administer, and populate our land with white settlers. Like Adolf Hitler, 4 decades later in relation to Germany and Europe at large, Rhodes argued that he needed to settle surplus British population on African lands. He proceeded to dispossess black people of their ancestral land in what is now called Zimbabwe and Zambia through aggressive and duplicitous means, stealing 3.5 square miles of black territory in one of the most ignominious land grabs in modern history. It is often said that during the imperial era, the trade followed the flag. Rhodes, in fact, invented the saying, in the British government following his lead, lending political and economical military support to his adventures. Not being satisfied with having cornered diamonds and gold productions in South Africa and establishing global monopolies, Rhodes was determined to find another El Dorado, flowing with gold in the Matebele land and the Mashona land. He used his agents to negotiate a concession with the Ndebele king, Lobengula. He naively believed that he had only ceded limited mining rights, but ended up losing his entire country to Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes arranged for one Grobler, a representative of the Boer Republic of Matebele land, to be murdered, and instigated Reverend John Mulford, an assistant to the administrator of Botswana, to meet with the illiterate Lobengula in 1888. Mulford then claimed that he had signed an agreement with the king to forbid the sale or lease of any part of his country or enter into any treaty without the approval of the British government. Lobengula denied this, having only agreed to peace and friendship between the Ndebele and the British. As I have constantly noted, Mulford's version was a huge, monstrous, naked lie that Rhodes used this duplicitous treaty to keep Germany, Portugal, and the Boers out of Zimbabwe. Rhodes drew up a secret contract promising two rough freebooters, Frank Johnson and Morris Henney, a total of 150,000 euros and 110 acres of land to command the white mercenaries to destroy Lobengula's rule. The Englishman is like a dog in the fable, the dog who cannot bear that the other dog should have few bones. Although the overfed brute is sitting below a bowl full to the brim, even as the British government professed its peaceful intentions with Lobengula. Jameson continued plans for a conflict, which was launched without any ultimatum or declaration of war, despite the legal fiction of earlier treaties having been agreed with Lobengula, such as the Mulford Treaty and the Root Concession. Jameson also lied to the British representatives that the Ndebele warriors were endangering white settlers in the territory. Rhodes himself lied that the servants of white settlers were being slaughtered by Ndebele fighters. Emissaries whom Lobengula sent to the British were taken prisoner and shot dead. Rhodes's methods often relied on subterfuge and dishonesty. They were shockingly brutal. This charter, or the Charter of Rhodes, as it was called, was used to kill indigenous Shona people by a psychopathic Rhodesian police chief, Captain Lendi, who was later promoted to magistrate. A letter by Queen Victoria to Lobengula was replaced with a forged one by Rhodes and Jameson, containing very different terms. Rhodes and his associate cynically manufactured Caesar's barley to wage a war that destroyed the Ndebele power between 1890 and 1893. He used scavenging tactics with the British government, warning that Germany, Portugal, or the Boer Republic would grab power in Zimbabwe if he did not do so on behalf of his native country. Using the false premises that the wire of the British South African Company had been stolen, Rhodes' men seized all African kettles in surrounding areas, many of them belonging to King Lobengula. This was clearly a provocative, scorched earth policy that could only lead to starvation, led by his trusted lieutenant, the racist Jameson. They then killed 30 of King Lobengula's men. Jameson blatantly lied that the Ndebele had killed 400 men, women, and children in a bid to recover their kettle, while in fact 7 fatalities had been reported by eyewitnesses. Other lies spread about Lobengula's fighters, that they had destroyed crops, looted homesteads on white farms, and killed farm workers. Rhodes's imperial desire to conquer and possess territory was insatiable. He patronizingly stated that Africa is the last uncivilized portion of the empire, and it must be civilized. Given his destructive legacy of empire building, Mr. Rhodes must be condemned for his imperial crimes. Did you ever hear of a country's name being changed? His worst fears were eventually realized. Northern Rhodesia became Zambia, and the statue of Rhodes in Lusaka was toppled when it achieved independence in 1964. Southern Rhodesia became independent Zimbabwe, and in 1980, they wiped clean the streets of Harare and Bulawayo of his statue. Both countries sought to remove the imperial stain by rebaptizing themselves. South Africa has only belatedly started a debate on the numerous Rhodes memorials that still litter its post-apartheid landscape. As we heard from here before, students at the University of Cape Town toppled a statue of Rhodes, prominently displayed on its campus in 2015. At the time when its main hall, the very center of its graduations and other ceremonies, was still being named after Rhodes' racist and destructive Lieutenant Jameson. Rhodes University in Grahamstown had earlier quietly removed a bust of a man whom it was named after from its main entrance to avoid a debate about renaming the university.
Lendawo, imdaka, lendawo, ibuhlungu, lendawo.
Ubuhlungu ababethu. Ubuhlungu ababethu. Ochikapala ababethu. Ababethu ochikapala. Ukholemela.
Ibuhlungu lendawo. Ibuhlungu lendawo. Ibuhlungu lendawo. Lendawo imdaka. Lendawo imdaka. Lendawo inzima. Kumele kufe umntwana kabani? Kumele kufe umntwana kabani? The black is fine. The black is partial. This account is terror. Kumele ufe umntwana kabani?
Ubuhlungu ababethu. Ubuhlungu ababethu.
As we leave today, I would love us
Ibuhlungu le ndawo.
Ubuhlungu abafethu. Ubuhlungu abafethu. Ochikaphala abafethu. Abafethu ochikaphala. Ukhona emele.
Ibuhlungu le ndawo. Ibuhlungu le ndawo. Ibuhlungu le ndawo. Le ndawo imdaka. Le ndawo imdaka. Le ndawo inzima. Kumele kufe umntwana kabani? Kumele kufe umntwana kabani? Deep black as fine. Deep black as partial. This account was steroid. Kumele kufe umntwana kabani?
Ubuhlungu abafethu. Ubuhlungu abafethu. Ukholemela. Ukholemela abafethu. Ochikaphala. Ochikaphala abafethu.
Itsila bhekeni. Ilitsila bhekeni. Imathatha bhekeni. Imathatha bhekeni. Ibuhlungu bhekeni. Ibuhlungu bhekeni.
As we leave today, I would like us just like one last contribution from you. As you came into the space on day one, which was yesterday, we asked you to write.
Okay. Imbizo has asked us to tell you about right? But before we get to that, I'd like to open the floor for our speakers to give us a bit of grounding in the conversation as well. And to ask the question, what is Imbizo's artwork telling us about our lived experience in the constitutional democracy? What is the work telling us about our society, about Makanda, and about Rhodes University in Makanda, right? So I hand over to Imbizo first to speak about Imbizo and the creative process, symbolism, and what he intended to portray.
Yes. So, Imbizo is a live art. I've read it series. The reason why I've read it series is because it happens in public. It indicates Abantu. The work has been shown in Cape Town, has been shown in Kimberley. It was the first time being shown in Makanda, rather the intervention being done in Makanda. But one of the important things to think about is CPR. When the conversation was, when the invitation was sent to me, or when it was sent to me, the conversation was around transformation issues. And the main question that I had was, who will see this intervention? Because the transformation in Imbizo was happening at the monument. And then the other question was around access. I don't know how many of you are sitting in the room knew about transformation in Imbizo at Rhodes University in 2026. So those are the kind of questions I was grappling with as to who has access to this transformation in Imbizo, who is invited, who may know about it. One of the questions I posed at monument is that Bekutheni is a spin up. Bekutheni is a spin up. And the other question is, Mapi Abantu. Mapi Abantu. Those were the incantations or rather invocations I said repeatedly the space. The other question was, buphi ubuntu bakho, buphi ubuntu bethu? The work, when I devised it really, was around working with students, was also part of my imperative to teach. So I extended an invitation to my 30 students to be part of this. And also there's an association called Inatesa, which is an association from Mandla, Elizabeth. And because part of my work also involves umculo, nesinging, nesandi. But also, part of the whole transformation in Imbizo was how many students knew about the transformation in Imbizo? How many workers, lecturers, who knew about Imbizo? And why was it an invitation only? And if it was about if people were invited, who was invited and why? And to the SFC of Rhodes University, did the student body know about Imbizo as a monument? Did the majority of student body knew about the transformation in Imbizo? And one of the questions was, Imbizo for whom? P. Why the monument? So the work started off Kwaloki, which is now also called Soka City. It was intentional because Aban Kalepagana needs to see the work. When I went to the school, business school in 7, then 6 hours, needed to see the work. So the work was intended also for them. How many students apart from the Upper University Rhodes have been to Refelection, have been Kwaloki? SRC, how many of your students have been in Kwaloki? So the work was really about also thinking about who's going to have access to those students. Because at the end of the day, we take for granted the value of what we see every day. It was about every day, it was about sunny moments, but also it was very political at the same time. Because the Rhodes is a space, it's not value free. Majority of workers, our students are playing now, our clients are playing now. So the work was really about also to think about hence the question was, and the other element that I needed to think about was this notion of why is it okay to do this for particular Rhodes in a city that's called Makanda? Then I will go more in terms of the signifiers and in terms of the views, but I think the important thing also for me was that I was, for the first time, working, including the students that I teach, which is my third years and second years, and also working with Natessa. Because the one up way to Aman Pabole Bavino, you don't need to say Aman. Because a lot of the time, we would be able to say, who can people and the work when you started off by film, the Soka City. About the months, why would I go to film with the wood? But after months, who would Baban? Asna Manzaki, Kudaras and Manzaki. The work moves as a procession coming to town. And interestingly enough, the views in this, or rather the comments that I got from Abashan by Soka City, was, the reasons are 10 million by culture. kwaloki bayabuza le nto niyenza kutheni ngenza phakathi. But again, because ngumsebenzi lona kwenzeke inhlelele apha kulo nyaka phaa usibawuthi phaa kaloki kukho umfulo kuthiwa umatyana. Umatyana is quite historic. Kwakho umntana owayehleli ubomi bakhe phaa, which was important because umsebenzi wokusebenza umphefumulo kamntana owajona phaa kaloku because yayo inhlelele eyenzeka eluntwini. Ilahleko yabazali bakhe yayingabazali bakhe bodwa, nathi silahlekele. So lo msebenzi part of it uyakuzi uba eyona njongo yawo was to think around this notion of inclusivity. Who gets privilege to come and roots? Kwenzeka ntoni ngomzali xa esuke endlelakhe nomntwana xa esuke endlelakhe zizapha? Zinto ezifihlwayo apho kule ndawo. Amakhubalo afihlwe kule ndawo esinyathela kuwo, amaqwili esinyathela kuwo uxesipha. Bayasoleka abantu, bayafa abantu bakuthi kule ndawo, bayafa abantu bakuthi kule ndawo. Imbonasela yokufa kwabo nentlungu yabo ininzi izindidi. Umsebenzi wam akukunika iimpendulo zalolileyo, yimbonasela yokuthi abantu mabathethe ngale ndawo sikuyo. Sina University ekuthiwa Rhodes University, 2016, SRC laa bust ifihliweyo iphi. Whether you see top or down, esastandi, eyeni bust iphi, SRC, it's your job to know. Or rather, it's part of the things that student body should be actually inquiring. But also, as a space has also become so much depoliticized. You know, we have to be silent and not speak up. Ngentlungu yabantwana bethu, abantwana babantu. Sikwi-university that's called the Rhodes University. uRhodes nanke uRhodes was responsible for ukufa komntwana kamzilikazi noNobengula. Amangcwaba wabo nangaphaa konencama. So those are things that are not very free. Amathambo abantwana kaNobengula abuyela nezimbabwe ngenxa kaRhodes. Le isikolo senu sithiwe ngakwazo. Kumele kufikana nabanye le ndawo, kumele nabanye kufike kafe kuba inzima le ndawo, ibuhlungu le ndawo, ibuhlungu le ndawo. Kutheni silapha kule building namhlanje? Baphi abantu? Aphi amanzi? Buphi ubuntu benu xa abantu bengenamanzi?
Because there you have it. The questions that the students have when you put together the artwork that you offered us at the Imbizo. There's a hand up there. But I want to say we're going to open up the space for questions and answers for conversation after all the speakers have spoken. So please hold that. That was a very loaded input, yes, with very loaded questions as well. Then I want to give over to Rand to speak to what the artwork sparked in us, what we saw in the mirror, but also to attempt to answer Imbizo's initial question around what are the effects of functioning and breathing in the state apparatus that is Rhodes University.
So something that's quite interesting about this whole situation is that I was there at the beginning of the performance in Soccer City in Bengal, and I was the only audience member. And there were incidental audiences, people who came, who were going on their way to clinic, going on their way to work, spotting this work, stopping, starting a conversation, what's happening here? What is this about? Take a look, get involved. It's a public space, you make an artwork in a public space. People are allowed to access that. And I understand from talking to some people who were part of the Imbizo that there was some kind of confusion about whether or not it was starting at Finger or if it was starting at the Arch. There seems to have been some lack of clarity there. But I think the fact that this is an experiential work, it's a durational work, so it takes time, it's something we have to experience. It's a processional work, so we are moving physically through space. This isn't just an image, it's an action that's moving across geography. And in doing something like that, you change spaces, you interact with people in the public realm. And so we have this work that is looking to walk across space, do certain actions, ask certain pertinent questions. And then we got to the Arch, and there were a bunch more people. Some of those people I spoke to were disappointed because they got their wires crossed. They said they would have been Fingo if they'd known about it. And events happen here. And then, oh, we're running out of time, so, quick 6 feet, got to get up the hill to the monument. Which is unfortunate, because if you're dealing in a processional work, it is sometimes less about what the work does, but what you experience and how that changes you. And walking in space is part of that action. But this is the thing with live art. There are risks, and sometimes it doesn't always translate, sometimes it doesn't always resonate with people. I mean, as a question around transformation, like this idea that, oh well, you know, the conference is now starting at 9:30, so we all got to quickly get in the bus and go up the hill. That seems to me to be a particularly Eurocentric vision of keeping time. It makes what should be a profound, moving and possibly uncomfortable experience. And I think that's something that's very important. A lot of people think that art should be something pleasant, something happy, that's something that kind of, you know, and it can do those things. But also sometimes art needs to show us where it hurts in the world, where things are not solved. Sometimes you need to break things open and ask uncomfortable questions. And so I was not part of the Imbizo. I was not privy to a bunch of questions that were being asked at the events. But I found it quite surprising that the nature of questions being asked in Soccer City, in Fingo, people being curious, people having inquiring minds, and the kinds of questions that were happening this side, where we are supposed to be the educational institution, we should have open minds. There was something quite closed going on, and I mean, I think it's sparked an interesting debate. We need to have these conversations. Coincidentally, I was guest lecturing in the drama department on live art and the use of ritual as a methodology in live art. And I asked those drama students to come through and check things out. And then subsequently to the performance, I was in the lecture discussing things. And one of the students said, somebody had seen the residual of the performance and had sent a message on their, I don't know, class or student group or whatever, saying, oh, you know, I see these various things, these signs, these symbols, watch out, people there, they're doing witchcraft on campus, be careful. And I was like, you know what, it's not about being careful, it's about being curious. And especially at an institution of higher learning, we should be curious. We should be going, what is going on there? And what's happening? And that was something that was very interesting, is the people asking questions and having group discussions in Fingo were being curious. But the questions that were happening here felt very closed. And there's something problematic about that. And so I think it's very useful that we are having this conversation and unpacking, well, what do these things mean? How do they work? And how do they work collectively? Because something that's very important about notions of ritual is that it should be collective. It should be something that people are contributing to. It should be a conversation. And I have some other thoughts, I might get into that later, but I think we should hand over.
Thank you very much, Rand. Thank you. Because also I'm also very interested in the conversation that we'll have with everyone else in the room as well. Let's hand over to you, Tazabaz, please. I'd like you to speak to Umbuzo's initial question on what are the effects of functioning and breathing in the state apparatus that is Rhodes University, but then specifically according to your expertise to speak on indigenous knowledge systems, spirituality, and wellness in higher education institutions, specifically at Rhodes. And this is particularly important because of the language that came up after Umbuzo's intervention.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So just to give you some context, now some of you might be familiar with who I am and what I do, but some of you might be the first time seeing me. So I am Dr. Tando May. I am a medical anthropologist at the anthropology department here at Rhodes. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow, so I'm conducting postdoctoral research. So my work, I specialize in indigenous knowledge systems, pedagogy, and medical pluralism. And the theoretical and conceptual frameworks on which I base my work is historical trauma theory and the ethics of care. So that's basically my work. My PhD explored the key concepts of how, within the indigenous cultural framework, indigenous people conceptualize trauma. As in how is trauma, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma understood, conceptualized, and managed. So the work is basically the same. Now, the Eastern Cape Province, what we now call the Eastern Cape Province, is a really traumatized space. Because in the last 400 years or so, there's been a lot of death and genocide that has taken place. A matter of fact, the man whom Branstown is named after was one of the mass murderers of indigenous people, Colonel Graham. And Colonel Graham, during his colonial era time, he had this, because he was a colonel in the army, right? So he directed the British Army. He used to have this concept of scorching the earth and traumatizing people. And he actually had this term that he used, proper of the highest degree. So that was his military method, traumatize the people to the highest degree, and that is how you get the land. And basically that's what his soldiers did. They went around traumatizing Xhosa-speaking people and indigenous people in the Eastern Cape, because we also need to understand that the people of the Eastern Cape are not just Amakos. Okay, we need to place these things into context. The Eastern Cape is an ethnically diverse province. So the people that we call Amakos are actually very diverse. They are, as anthropologists, we actually have moved away from the terminology of labeling the people of this as Amakos. We say Xhosa speaking. Because within the realm of Amakosa, you have Amagalega, Amabovana, Amabata, Amabovana, and other tribes, guys. Amamfengu, Amambondo, Amachachabe, Amaxhosomthonyama. The list goes on and on. Like Nelson Mandela, for example, was Umtemu. Nelson Mandela was not Xhosa. But when you speak about Nelson Mandela, you say not Xhosa. But he was Temu. And so a part of the Eastern Cape, for example, on the Wild Coast, Komakosa and Johnson, so you find Bodo people. And there's been some groups there in the area who actually are now pushing for the South African government to actually recognize their native language of isiBholo as a language because they were conquered by AmaXhosa, and that's how they got to speak isiXhosa. Right? So even within the Eastern Cape province itself, Xhosa people, AmaXhosa Mthonyane, traumatized other black tribes. Okay? So the trauma of the Eastern Cape is complex. So we mustn't just see it in the terms of black versus white. There's also black versus black. Okay? So the trauma space there is quite fraught with pain, right? And so then, as anthropologists, those of us who study historical trauma theory, then we study the concept of how do Xhosa people understand pain, especially pain that happens in the collective consciousness space. How is that understood? Now, Xhosa-speaking people have their own indigenous cosmology, and this cosmology places Uqamata, or the creator, at the center of creation, right? And then Uqamata being the all-embodying divine entity, then has created human beings. The human beings then, of course, pass on. Human beings don't live forever. They die. And then those human beings then become ancestors. So Xhosa people believe that when a human being is born, you are born as a double entity. You are born as a physical form with biology and cells and blood, and then you are born as a spiritual entity with umoya, umpefu, right? So the process of birth actually doesn't begin in the physical realm, it begins in the spiritual realm, where the ancestors imbue the physical body with umoya umdala. Hence then, when somebody is born, one of the first rituals that AmaXhosa perform is Imbeleko, which is to acknowledge that the child that has been born comes from the ancestors. Therefore, the term Ubeleka means to carry on the back. We carry this child as one of our own, with an acknowledgement that this child will then live through their physical body, and their spirit will experience life in this physical body. But there will come a time when they have to pass on, and Umoya will return to the land of the spirits. That is why then in Xhosa cosmology, when a man dies, there's a ritual of Ukapa, no Uwisa. So Ukapa basically is a ritual which is performed to usher the Umoya, the spirit, back to the ancestral realm where it came from in the first place. Right? So that the person can reconnect with the ancestors. And then when again that person has, after some time, maybe after a year or 2 or 3 years, so this person is now, the spirit is going to be brought back to the realm of the living so that the person can serve as an ancestor, as a guiding force. Are we together? Yeah, so that is the cosmology. So we actually find that the ritual in the Xhosa space is all-encompassing. There are rituals before birth, rituals during birth, rituals after birth, rituals in death, and rituals after death. So, African philosopher John Mbeki, who is one of the most prominent philosophers in Africa, he's been known for terming the term that to be born an African is to be born into a religious context. Because life in Africa is imbued with ritual, ceremony, and embodiment. Okay? So now, let's take this into context. Now, the historical trauma that happened to AmaXhosa happened in the collective consciousness, right? It's a shared trauma. So, which that means when it now comes to managing trauma which has happened in the collective, Xhosa-speaking people have their own indigenous strategies for dealing with that. Imicimbi is one of them. Inhlambululo is one of them. Because, let's fix the terminology here. Inhlambululo is an indigenous Xhosa term, meaning washing, cleansing. Cleansing from what? From pain, from suffering, from trauma. So Inhlambululo is a ritual, which embodies the physical space that you occupy, time, and also embodies spirituality and the ancestors, both the seen and the unseen. So Inhlambululo as a ritual is all-encompassing, which is then means that Inhlambululo can be a performance, but in the indigenous cosmology exists beyond performance. Do you understand? So those are the key elements that we have to understand about AmaXhosa. Now, in the area of Makhanda, because this is the Battle of Ramstown took here, matter of fact, as a traditional healer, I'm a bit nervous about using the term Makhanda. I'm going to tell you guys why. So, Utata Makhanda was initiated as Ibon. There are different types of traditional healers, wasn't it? There's Amagriha. amaxhwele, abathandazeli, ababelekisi, amakhankatha, ingcibi, and amadoda. So traditional medicine in this process is very broad because the ethnic groups themselves are diverse. Okay, so there's diversity of spiritual practice. Utata Makanda Kanene was a leader, which means that he was initiated into the fraternity of war. Amadola are referred to as the healers of war, not that Amadola cooked up war. But during times of conflict, the chiefs would then call the Amadola to strengthen the soldiers, the indigenous warriors, so that when they go into the battlefield to fight the enemy, they are going there with the spirits of their ancestors to help them defend the land. So Utata Makanda Kanene was one of those traditional healers that would prepare umuti, prepare the ritual, prepare inhlambululo for the indigenous warriors before they attacked the British. So during the War of Refelection, when Utata Makanda Kanene came in the 1800s to fight the British, he performed those rituals. But in Lisa, the army, the indigenous army, you understand? So in classical cosmology then, when somebody plays such an important role in healing historical trauma and shared trauma, there's usually reservations about how their name is used. So which means that in is in violation of the indigenous cosmology. Do you understand? But then but the indigenous cosmology itself, naming somebody so prominent, a healer of the highest caliber, because Udoda is the PhD of indigenous medicine. Amakwe, when they are struggling to resolve matters of trauma, they refer to Amakwe. And then when Amakwe is struggling, they refer to Amakwe. So Amadola are the creme de la creme of indigenous medicine and indigenous academy. So Utata Makanda was such a person, was the creme de la creme. And so when the people here of Grahamstown are living within that historical and contemporary context, right? And it's going to be very difficult then for people to understand ritual when it's done in a collective space without them prior knowledge as to what is the ritual about. And when you can create those conflicts, so I remember school, when you were saying earlier, the purpose of the performance was to engage the community, right? But the way in which the Imbizo itself was held, the people were not there. So the message got lost. Not that the message itself wasn't there, because art plays a key role in transformation, right? It's an essential tool. We cannot really transform without artists. But then when the space itself is not inclusive of the ontological and epistemological frameworks of the people, then that disjuncture creates space for conflict. You must also remember that this is a collective space, right? Collective consciousness. And Amaxhosa have their own methods, epistemologies, frameworks, and methodologies for managing collective trauma. So do you guys see the disjuncture here? And it can be extremely difficult then in spaces like these where we are talking about transformation and healing the collective consciousness, and yet we maintain it in a very elitist space. Because it then means we are repeating the same cycles of oppression that we claim to uproot. Because if we're truly saying that we represent the pain of indigenous people, then there can be no discussion about indigenous people without them. Now, in 2024, I had the privilege of being honored with an internship at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada, but we were based in British Columbia because we were collecting data amongst the indigenous people of Canada, especially those on the coast. They are called the Coast Sage people. And they of course, their trauma in British Columbia, that's why it's called British Columbia, right? Because they, just like us as South Africans, are colonized by the British. So the indigenous people, they also have their own methods of dealing with collective trauma. And one of the ways in which they do it, they have this concept of not about us, without us. So they actually pressurize the Canadian government. If then they're going to have trauma initiatives or transformation initiatives, which are going to happen in the collective space, they have to be invited. And so I think in South Africa, we haven't yet gotten there because we were historically, indigenous medicine in South Africa was illegal. By show of hands, how many of you know about the Witchcraft Suppression Act? Yeah. As once upon a time in South Africa, it was actually illegal to practice indigenous spirituality. You go to jail for that. So traditional healers were actually arrested during apartheid. So which then created a lot of these colonial narratives about what it means to heal and what it means to be a healer in the African context. So South Africans, were people who would then carry a lot of that negative connotations about indigenous spirituality and rituals, which you can then create a space like you said, you were in the township, you are amongst indigenous people, but yet the people of the community were telling you, go do it in the church, right? And so that is the collective trauma. In psychology, is referred to as internalized oppression. Right? When you oppress a group of people for 400 years, and then you tell them that their culture and their systems are invalid, at some point in time, people are going to start believing that their culture is invalid. Right? It's what Professor Hugo Kahneman refers to as Afroization. And he takes a very bold term by using the term. And he actually, it takes it as far as to say that even in democratic South Africa, the ANC-led government in democratic South Africa categorizes black people. Because we've got situations where our government tells us that it is decolonial, it's a decolonial government, and yet we have instances where black people have to live without water. Akamanzi. People have to live without water, people have to live without jobs, people have to live without food. So in essence, the indigenous people of South Africa have never escaped their trauma. They are still stuck in it. So that is why the conversations about transformation can be so triggering for many of us. Because it is a collective trauma that is still unresolved. And so as anthropologists then, we study these complexities. And in spaces like these, you will find that some people will be hurt because I'm also a traditional healer, so at the Imbizo school, I didn't have a chance to tell you about this. There were people who got sick, like really, really sick. Like some people actually had to leave the event and go to their cars. Some people actually left the event altogether. They got in their cars and they drove home because they were feeling something in their body, but they didn't quite have the terminology or the language to actually say what is it that's going on, right? And I think that's why this post-Imbizo space is so important. So that when ask, what did you see, what did you feel? So we can also give people the terminology and the language to help them describe their feelings. But sometimes people know what they felt, they just don't have the terminology to describe what they felt. And so it is going to be that type of issue I see in my professional opinion. I think many academic institutions in South Africa struggle with this, where we haven't yet quite indigenized trauma studies. So we still view trauma from Western theories, and we haven't actually started theorizing from the village. And until we do that, then conversations about true transformation and decolonizing education are going to be stuck, along with our trauma and our pain, going to be stuck there. And when that happens, it just creates a very toxic cocktail of emotions that people don't know what to do.
But just to maybe it's a question that's maybe to you, to ask Buti. In our family Rhodes, what forms of drinking do you go and eat? Because we come in multiples, right? But also the architecture, the space, right? This conversation, how would it look like? City, what kind of a conversation would have to comprehend it? And also, one of the other things, acceptance of the food in the work. Because one of the students, just below my own counter, was really uncomfortable using the food, in work, because this notion, so there had to be an unpacking of. It really also is one of the places where food has been mined, actually. And food is used in different, it's as a cultural material, there's value in that, with the use of the food. But I think it is important to bring back is towards the invisible white man, Rhodes, why we are okay with this notion of what's been hidden, what's been silenced, and the language also, the rather language. Because it becomes easy when you go to what is it? And I think also the violence. We need also to talk about the violence. But so it will help them because it also is recuperative, meaning that irony is indeed. And then how then does then house go? What was we can't turn around in now as it's apolitical, it's very free. Because Uza will to only sugar and Uza as mentioned. So I think these are sort of the things or conversations that I was hoping that Mr. would do and espouse, not to close but to open. Part of the zero less decline. Nalenda amanzi ke inzima namanzi. Indimi yamanzi because inamanzi. If we let the see, we need to really go deep. But what the commercialization amounts in this day, 2026. So, a summary. The two of us setting Isango, as I say, you need to do the homework. The history of Isango, why we talk to Isango in Pai? What happened in Isango? Why would Skombozo artistically be using Irako, I beg Pai Isango? When is it going to be Isango? Because there is someone who can but when you don't let me buy something, you have to try and buy something. When's it going to be? Buy something. So, I'm letting them colleague, don't share us about classes. It's the Bible tools, especially as buy something. Do we have to use it as a main entrance rules? Given that do you even know it's such that people were killed there? As a way. When your family student says now, what registers? Why are students not here now? Essentially. Why are we here alone?
Thank you very much. John, I want to open the conversation to everyone in their space. Thank you very much, Dr. Tulubas. I have so many questions. Let's open up the conversation. How many minutes do you have? Okay, great. There was a hand up there at the back. Let's start there. Do you have a roaming mic? A roaming mic? Okay, let's see if there are any other hands. Okay, so that's one, Susie, you're two, then you are three. Maybe let's take four in this round and then we'll turn it up again. Go ahead.
My name is Rhodes. I'm a fine arts student. I'm also a leader here at Rhodes University. I'm also one of the cast members for Imbizo by All Foods Schools. I think I share the same sentiments with All Foods Schools when he had the questions of, okay, we're having a transformation in Imbizo at the monument. Who is it about? Who is it for? Where are the students? And why is there like a guest list and things like that such? So then I took it upon myself and I queried about it. I asked, the same questions that he did, but to the relevant people. And I came to understand that students were consulted. So before the initiative of the event, students were consulted, conversations were had, there was even a list where students were supposed to present or something like that, but we didn't see it at the Imbizo. Although I do understand why those would be the main concerns, because I had the same concerns as a Imbizo. I do think that it's very important that the student body was at the actual event. So even though they were consulted, they should have been at that event. I'd also like to congratulate all the different stakeholders that put together the event. This is a very, congratulations guys, this is a very important conversation, this is a very big event. My sentiments are that Uskumbuzo posed questions towards the SRC. So what I'm basically trying to say is Uskumbuzo is not attacking or putting you guys on the spot or anything on that such. I believe you guys should take this as Uskumbuzo reaching out. I mean, he's doing it in front of everyone, but I would say he's reaching out to you guys for collaboration, right? So we have different stakeholders that put together this event. I do believe that there's leadership coming up. I think this conversation should have more students involved in it because it is about the students. Even the performance of Ikamburugo in itself, I know a number of students would have a lot of things to say about the event. School mentioned that the event was supposed to start at 8:30, but most people didn't come from Ofingo and only attended at the monument. And we could tell that a lot of people were not present with the performance because the questions we had during lunchtime are questions that would have been addressed or people would have known by the time that they attended the performance in itself. It's a very important performance because it speaks about cleansing and undoing and unlearning. So I think that the stakeholders that are here today, including the SRC, should further extend this conversation and have it again, perhaps the performance and the conversation itself. I know that there is a VC forum usually around Leadership Week. I'm not sure if it's happening this year. Perhaps we could utilize, that platform to then have this conversation again. I also like to say that I think we've lost the art of curiosity. And by that, I mean, when the event was happening, we had a whole ritual at the admin, in front of the admin building, where Skubuzo's blood was shed, where the mimic of the ambassadors of Rhodes was there, and we were asking for it to be removed. So when Skubuzo mentioned to the SRC by EP ambassadors, homework and stuff like that, he's referring to the 2015 Rhodes was for movement that happened in Cape Town, where students were able to demolish the sculpture or the statue of Rhodes himself. And what Rhodes did, or Rhodes staff members, what they did with theirs is that they took it away and then they hid it in Corey Library. So it is still there. At Suswanga, it's still within the institution. So we're speaking about cleansing, decolonizing and activism, but then our institution itself enables our own oppressions. Then what's the point of having these conversations when there's no cleansing that's actually going to be happening? So we're talking about the cleansing, we're all aware that the cleansing is supposed to happen, but no one is actually doing the cleansing. So it's like we shouldn't do the work for the sake of posting about it or having it on documents and it looking good on paper and then people seeing that Rhodes has transformation and activism, but it should actually be done, whether it comes to one's inconvenience or as a majority. So we shouldn't do the work just for the work, but we should do the actual, produce the work. So are we actually seeing the fruits of our conversations? Are we actually seeing the benefits, the fruits of what is it producing? Or are we just having conversations to have more conversations? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon to everyone in the panel. And thank you so much for your insights to everyone there. I'm one of the people that attended the Imbizo for 2 days. And I think that when you say that the message is lost, you're quite correct. It would have been useful after the performance to have a Imbizo say what you're saying now, so that people can understand. You're saying the performance was meant to spark a conversation. We didn't have the conversation. We spent 2 days at the monument trying to figure out why are people depressed in the campus? Why the dehumanizing environment? Why are people feeling like they're being treated like second-class citizens? This would have provided some of the answers. This would have started the conversation of what now? Yes, it's heavy on all of us. People are on chronic medication for depression, for hypertension, forever. What now? What do we do now? And I think because now you had all these senior leaders, policy makers, decision makers around the same, in the same roof, and in the same room, why not have that conversation that is long overdue? It's dirty, it's heavy. What do we do? What is it going to take for us to change the place, to cleanse the place? What is needed? Except that now we have the performance where that sits. I'm one of the people that is sick. I had to go and lay in the car for an hour. So the conference organizers could have even organized rooms to say this performance might trigger emotions that you're not going to know. What are they? What to do? There's rooms here that have been organized, people that are going to equip you or assist you with whatever. But what now? What do we do now? We all have a collective agreement that the place is heavy, it's dirty, we know that. Help us. You've identified it, but now how do we make it lighter for everyone? People were crying literal tears about the treatment that they're going through in this campus. And it cannot be that everyone is going to come here and then they are heavy, where they are seen that. Abantu bayalwa, the departments, it has to do with your keyword I think you said this one time that then there will keep it because what do we do now? And it might be that because the conversation that we didn't have at the monument, you might want to gather the senior leadership and have them watch the videos again and start the conversation. But who's the Mufunda Nagabana who said the Sias Bangabana in now in wrong in Daga Yasena. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have these conversations, this Imbizo, then what? I mean, my question on the day that I asked Claire, why are we having cleanse on the second day? We're supposed to cleanse, and then we say, okay, now, way forward. But we started with the way forward, we looked at the themes, we tried to find out how to move forward. Now we have cleansing. No. So help us, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rui Bomeama. I'm an SRC representative. I think I have a few things to say. I think firstly, a big thing that colonialism really did well was demonize spirituality. And I think till this day, we haven't had that conversation to a greater stance, also involving our elders who seem to have a greater understanding of what spirituality actually is, and trying to bring over that conversation for us, the newer generation, who there seems to be a gap between us understanding and truly knowing what the spirituality is and what it does to us as well. Secondly, I myself, being from Zimbabwe, very much rooted within Rhodesian history and understanding. My parents are the one who grew up within that type of era as well. And the decolonization itself of Cecil John Rhodes is a humongous thing. Until this day, I still believe that the reason why Zimbabwe does not move forward is because of that, what do you call it in English? It's Minyama in Shona, but it's because of that lack of understanding of all the death that occurred and all the trauma actually that is there within that country that is just not being spoken about, because we not only don't know how, we understand that it's there, but we also don't know what to do afterwards. I also speak to here at Rhodes University the fact that the institution is a reflection of its own society, and also that as the SRC, we have been told several times that we are governance and not management. So there are these things that we also want to speak about, and that we actually do speak about and fight about, but then because we have no, we've been told that we have no authority to actually address it, then there's not much really we can do about it, unfortunately. But we have the need and the greed to actually do so. So within our collaboration with people like you, so that we can actually push further for actual change. But then also the thing that got me specifically with that ritual and artistic demonstration, specifically at the Arch, is that at peak times where South Africa is going through xenophobic attacks and bigger issues in the state, we have such a display under Islamic-owned not territory but property as well. It almost seems as if we are tone deaf to what's happening in the larger scale of things. As was mentioned as well, that Rhodes University is not Rhodes University, but the Eastern Cape is not only the home of Makrosa, but it also illustrates in Rhodes University we are not only made up of Xhosa-speaking people, it is a combination of international students, a combination of different types of people that have different types of opinions and mindsets. So us having an artistic demonstration like that opens up for scrutiny, unfortunately, from different opinions and different eyes as well. So, thank you.
Greetings to everyone. My name is Sandile Wagasaki. I was born and bred in Grahamstown. Open Okri on the Famish Road said, if you look at things too closely, everything breaks your heart. I am one of the people who were heartbroken by the fact that there was a ritual of which I didn't, give consent to partake on. That was performed at the space where I'm present. Maybe it's part of, the trauma that you talk about or that you spoke about, that I internalized the trauma so much that now I feel like I'm being violated by some of these things. Be that as it may, I'm trying to understand if now we are doing what we call a debriefing by doing this, because I believe that if a troop of soldiers are going to war, they get briefed as to what and how tactics and whatever that they are going to do in that war, and then they get a debriefing when they come back. So now we are traumatized, right? I think I should put it in Isigiko. Xa unenceba, amanye amanxeba awaphiliswa kukuthulukwa, koko abanzulu ngenxa yokuthulukwa. Kudala lithulukwa eli inxeba. Side size nini ke ngoku namakhambi namachiza okunyanga eli nxeba sisoloko salithuluka. Ndifike ngo-2018 apha eRhodes. Ndimane ndingena ndiphume, ndingene ndiphume. Ngelifuna umsebenzi. Ndiya ekuxhekweni ngoku. Oko eli nxeba lithulukwa. Ingathi kuba lizode liphile ngoku kuthulukwa. Ingaske linyangwe ngoku, ndiyabulela.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do you want to? Yes.
Okay, so to start off, those who had asked an important question of, in my professional opinion, what do I think needs to happen? And I agree with what has been shared by many people here. The very first thing that I think we need to acknowledge is that transformation does not start externally and then come to the inside. Transformation begins from the inside. It's internal work that you do which then exude out of you into the external. Because what you think about, what is an institution? We are the institution. Tina, the people here at Rhodes, we are the institution. So if we are going to decolonize Rhodes, it means we must decolonize ourselves, the people who make up the institution. So transformation needs to begin from within. And then from the internal, we can then start to focus on the external. And the transformation model that we are using in this university is the other way around. We begin on the external, hoping that the external will somehow inspire the internal. And that's not, like we said, we come from different cultural backgrounds, different amangela, right? So we cannot just be left with that from the external structure, hoping that the people would be inspired internally. We have to somehow find a space where we allow people to feel and to go through what they're going through and to express their pain in ways that in our departments and in our offices is not made conscientious of. When Utata says, La Manega, keep on being pushed and pushed and pushed, that is true. Because the essence is that everywhere in Grahamstown, guys, we are walking on dead bodies. During 1856, a big tragedy happened in the area of Eastern Cape, the cattle killing. The cattle killing movement led to the death of many, many people. Some of those people were not buried. They were left just in general, eaten by wild dogs, wild animals. So some of the bodies are underneath the buildings, underneath the floor, underneath the shoprite, underneath the checkers, and all of the places that we go to. So the town itself is a grave. We are living Emmanuel. And so because the people whose pain was never acknowledged, whose pain was never recognized, we will feel it. Because remember, the way that I positioned it is that Amaxhosa are a communal people, but also the individual feeds into the communal feeds into the individual. So even the spirits of this place, we walk on their dead bodies, we walk on their bones on a daily basis. You'll actually find, if you talk to the traditional healers of Grahamstown, they'll tell you that I'm not going to legs. Because we're literally walking on people's graves. So the internal work needs to be prioritized. But then Rhodes does have a very colonial view of looking at internal work, because the only internal work that Rhodes does is a counseling center and nothing else. We need an indigenous knowledge system center at Rhodes, where we can actually start utilizing our teasers. So these are and actually come and figure out what, if we're going to use the teaser, in what context, and what is the ethical framework that we are going to use for using traditional medicine. Currently, right now at Rhodes, we need to decolonize mental health. Because the only place where you can go to talk about your feelings is the counseling center and nowhere else. If we are then indigenous people, then we need an indigenous center where we can actually have these conversations, where they're properly held by people who are knowledgeable in how to hold.
Something I want to comment on, just, and it's coming up in a number of the questions here, of people going, well, could we have this explained to us straight after the fact? And I think something that's very important about this kind of work is that it's what was said in the introduction. Let's paint the painting and then please explain the painting to me. This is asking people to do double work. And part of the thing here that's unfortunately lost in translation is that because people were not there for the whole of this process, to go through the process, to walk that space, to do the things collectively, and therefore to understand in the doing of this action in space, walking the distance, communing with people, hearing what else gets said. Because I think if we are going to transform ideas or do the internal work, is the idea that there is a binary of indigenous and Western and institutional. Like, we live in a collective where we have multiple people from multiple different backgrounds. And one of the things that's quite important about a notion of ritual is that often we think of this as being something traditional, something sacrosanct, something stable. But that's not the case. These things change over time, and they change through collective conversation. They change through experiences of different ways of doing and being. And so I think it's good that we are having this conversation, but often to do that kind of work, and then to have to tell you straight afterwards, you know, the emotional work of carrying that kind of performance, being part of that, it's very difficult to then shift into some other kind of mode in which you now, you know, oh, I'm just going to step onto the stage and pretend to be somebody else. Because you become somebody else when you make these kinds of works. You are carrying things change, the energy is there. And I think that a lot of people feeling ill afterwards, or feeling confused, they were deprived of the opportunity to be part of that whole process. Perhaps they would have felt differently about things if they had been part of an extended process, not kind of tacked onto the end of things. So I think it's when we try to understand artwork, and not everybody has the same experiences or education or whatever, but we can understand gesture, we can understand signs and symbols, and certainly when you're making this kind of work, you think about what might this signify. And it's not pretense. You do intend to really do things, really move people, change things in the world. And I think what I'm saying here a lot is this sort of almost this expectation of, well, we're going to have this event, we're going to have an artwork, we're going to have an intervention, but it's almost like a nice to have, like, oh, there's a distraction, we're having a conversation and there's a string quartet playing in the corner, but we're not going to sit and listen, we're having a conversation. And in order to really grapple with what this work did, because what we're getting here is a lot of questions of, Skumbuzo, now please explain what you were doing, rather than, well, we didn't attend what you were doing, and I appreciate there might be multiple reasons why that didn't happen. But it's just asking somebody to do extra work as an artist. You've made this art, you've made this thing in space, and now please explain after the fact, you know, you've done a painting, but I'm going to have a blindfold on, and then please describe what's in the picture. You know, the artwork is the artwork. Talking about the artwork is asking the artist to do extra labor when it is a question of look at the artwork, what is it doing, be part of it, and this kind of thing is experiential. You've got to be present, you've got to do the actions or see the things or hear what other people are talking about. And certainly I think we're going to move forward with ideas of ritual healing, ritual conversations. They need to be collected and they need to be experienced. We can't dictate that this is one way of doing it. It needs to invite all parties to feel like they can be involved in things and to witness and experience.
I mean, it's something that the end of the day has to give through, but it doesn't have to be a human life. It doesn't have to be like a real wedding or people being traumatized. But I guess that for the Office of the Transformation, more than talking, it is to think around what platforms, what methodologies are put in place. I'm not here to give answers or works about that, but it's just to open up the space to identify that something has to give, and but also hold people accountable. Kuba ekugqibeleni kuzawube kufuneka nabani kudibene xa buhlungu imdaka inzima. Thank you.
staying with us for this long, but what's apparent is that this conversation is not over. We have to continue having this conversation. I'm leaving with so many questions and answers, and because of time, we have to wrap it up. But I invite everyone to have a conversation now as we enjoy our refreshments, but then also to come to our office as well to speak to, giving us ideas on how we can engage with this further and bring this conversation to the university community, make sure that everyone is there. Claire, do you want to say something before we can go? Thank you. Sure.
Before you leave, there is a beautiful exhibition happening in this building at 6:30. Hence, you see the plate outside. This house is for sale. Come again at 6:30 in this gallery. Thank you.
Colleagues, thank you so much for being here today. It's very obvious who is here, who isn't here, so we appreciate you being here. You know, the reason we had this conversation is because of the fact that we initiated a process that had consequences and we had to deal with those consequences. We know that this process is not over, and we know that we can't walk it alone. And so what I'm asking you for is, as the people in this room, having had this conversation, what are the immediate next steps? What are the immediate next steps that we need to take as an office in order to progress this conversation and have it find traction? I do want to say this. This conversation, compared to a conversation that is happening in the boardrooms and council chambers, in the senior leadership team, on opposite sides of a spectrum. This conversation is considered mad, crazy, so radical, right? Some of the most conservative conversations around transformation are considered mad and radical in those senior leadership conversations. And so we really, really need your help. We need this collective consciousness to help us take this extremely important conversation. Even those of us who consider ourselves fairly conscientized are walking around in the dark. How do we take this extremely important discussion and have it find expression in the way in which this university access or distributes resources, how it makes decisions at the level of council and at the level of Senate about who goes where, what is important, where money goes, what is valued and what is not. It is a huge challenge for us. Because like I said, the discussion we're having here and the discussion happening in the Sam Alf that I didn't attend yesterday because I forgot, they're very, very different. And we really need you to help us walk that path. So, I suppose we need to walk away as an office now, and we need to go, okay, well, what's next? So what is next? Please.
We need to develop an Indigenous health center here.
Okay.
It is crucial. I mean, Rhodes, do you guys know that in other parts of another university in South Africa, there's actually a designated traditional leaders on campus? Today, we don't have that. Even UCT is ahead of us. You know what I mean? So we have Indigenous people from different walks of life at this campus, and yet we don't provide space for dealing with these kinds of emotions. When people get triggered, we send them to the counseling center. The counseling center is not equipped. It's not equipped to deal with these type of things. So we need to figure out the process. How are we going to actually develop an Indigenous health platform where people can go and have these conversations with the people who are actually trained in holding space for them, like how they do in other universities. Because the Rhodes is behind in terms of that. Other universities have already done it. I think in CU, City Napen, and UJ, and UP, and UK, and yeah, so the Rhodes is behind on that.
Thank you.
Hello. Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for today. I think we all learned so much, and there's also so much to say. My name is Imbizo, and I'm the Activist and Transformation Councillor for 2026. You had asked Dr. Kelly, what is the way forward? And I can't help but think about our interview on Let's Talk, where the question was, should we, in the next 10 years, should we find ourselves having the conversation? What has changed? Nothing has changed. Who is to be blamed? And I think it also links back to the broader conversation that's been happening where it's SRC this, higher management has done this, and. It brings me back to my response that day, which is, in the next 10 years, should we find ourselves post-Imbizo still having this conversation in the conservative way that we are, and looking at it in a narrow-minded way that we have been this whole entire time, many years ago until today, we will all be too blamed. Because transformation is not going to only happen at a level of management, at governance. It's going to happen with everybody. It's a collective decision to say that as everybody, we're standing together and we're going to decolonize everything. It also links back to the conversation about how we decolonize the Rhodes University remnants, the Rhodes remnants that stay, right? That is not a conversation that only happens at an SRC level. It's a conversation that happens with everybody. And I loved what Madam 2025 said about collaboration. Collaboration is as simple as having a conversation and saying, hey, this is what we think should be done. It doesn't fall on just one person, it falls on everybody. And so if we unite under the arm of understanding that real transformation is decolonization, then we start the actual transformation. And yeah, I think that's our way forward.
Okay, thank you. There's one more hand. And then I also heard some suggestions for a way forward, which I'd like to share with you.
Hi everyone, my name is Ritmelo Patley. I'm the SRC Sporting Society's Councillor. Just to add on to what my activism and transformation councillor said. Yeah, it's about real time when we talk about how African spiritualities aren't given their platform on campus. Rather, priority will be given to churches. We will be all for churches, and a church needs a venue now, a church needs a space now on campus. It's done in like 2 minutes. But comes to African spirituality, that's a conversation we all get to have because we won't give them their platform. I, for one, had a society called the Rhodes University African Spirituality Committee. That society couldn't even be active on the campus because we didn't get the numbers it deserved. That society would have been the start of leading for so many other things. Then now you get into residents, sub-wardens and wardens are supposed to be dealing with students that have their African spirituality moments. Does it make sense? Are they trained for that? So it's about time that the real transformation starts with, as a university, we see that African spirituality is not given the platform on campus. It's about time. And that's where transformation starts. Thank you.
Thank you. And so, colleagues, we're going to close off, but we're obviously nowhere. We are at a point where this conversation is just starting. And so when I said about what are the immediate next steps, we know that we need to invest in things and so on, but I literally want to know, when is the next gathering? Who's going to be in that gathering? And what are we going to be talking about? That's what I'm interested in. And so I invite you as a collective to think about that, to contact ourselves as an office that can facilitate those gatherings. 3 of the things that have come out of this discussion for me are, first of all, that there was a suggestion that we have a gathering like this, discuss this piece of work, discuss it in relation to the culture of this institution with our senior leadership in a great amount of depth, over the course of half a day even, maybe longer. The second suggestion I got is that we have the same discussion, possibly at Leadership Week, with a broader body of our students, again, with the same depth, and specifically with regards to the culture of this institution. And the third suggestion that I got out of this discussion was that we find a way and we work with a group of people, potentially Tandakazi, maybe Imbizo, whoever it is, FPDMZ, and the counseling center, that we put together a process that initiates
it's a process where we can include African cultural and spiritual practices, or indigenous cultural and spiritual practices, in what we consider to be wellness in our institution, for both staff and students. So those are the three things I got out of this discussion. There will be more, and we will gather again in various shapes and forms, because this discussion is not over. But I see everybody needs to leave. Everyone's leaving the venue. So I think that brings us to a natural close. And again, thank you very much for being here.